go up, diddy up, up. They go down, diddy down, down. They enchant all the ladies and see all the scenes with their up, diddy up, up. And they're down, diddy down, down. Up and down, flying around, looping the loop and defying the ground. Up and down, they're frightfully keen, those magnificent men in their flying machines. They can fly upside down with their feet in the air. They don't think of danger, they really don't care. Newton would think he had made a mistake to see those young men and the chances they take. Those magnificent men in their flying machines, they go up, diddy up, up. They go down, diddy down, down. They enchant all the ladies and see all the scenes.
Welcome to the Powell River Airport in Powell River, British Columbia, Canada. Home of some experimental builders and aviators. Home of the Westview Flying Club. And a ragtag assortment of planes, boats, electrical boom trucks, and my home built seaplane, a Sea Ray that I call the Spirit of Mackenzie. She's not quite finished yet. 90%, as I described in the first video in this series. My mission over the next 6 months, which I plan to document in this series of YouTube videos, is to complete the build of this airplane, test it, learn to fly it, get it legal, and then enjoy some general aviation in the area around Powell River, which includes out to the west, the ocean, called here the Salish Sea, and the supposed 32 freshwater lakes in the area of Powell River. Right now, the build is about 90% complete, as I described in the first video. It's taken me over 6 years to get to this point, because up until now, it's just been a hobby. And I've used what time I could to move the build along. But now I've gotten serious. I've got to get this build finished. I got to get the plane flying. So I'm going to use some more professional project management techniques to move the build along. The learning to fly component as well. And I'll bring up these project management techniques in each video. I'm also going to take on some other challenges, relearn some life skills, because hey, building a plane and learning to fly it is not challenging enough. So relearning to play the bagpipes, which I have not played in 4 decades, is one of those skills, and I have a few others which I will mention in upcoming episodes. So please subscribe, like, and enjoy. What I've been doing this morning is finally mounting, or once again, I should say mounting, the Dynon modules on the extension to the wire harness support tray. So far I've put the Adahars unit in place. You can see the 4 brass screws I've used, which the manual insists you use, so you don't have a magnetic interference with the compass components in the Adahar unit. I've also put some spacer washers underneath the unit and longer screws than needed right now, so that that can be leveled in the future. The layout model I'm following is this photograph from the Progressive Aerodyne factory, I believe, in Tavares, Florida, by their electronics specialist, Angel. Someone suggested that his layout is a really good model to follow, so I'm doing that. Now that I've got the Adahars unit in place, I'm going to install the EMS, engine management unit, right there, and the spare battery, which will spare battery for the Dynon, the backup battery for the Dynon engine flight information system. So all going well, I'll get all that mounted today. But then nothing all goes well when building an aircraft or rebuilding a sailboat or fixing something in your house or on your car, does it? But that's the joy, and that's why we do it over and over and over again until we get it. This is Hamel Lake, otherwise known as Westlake. Used to be the backup water supply for the municipality of Powell River. But what's most interesting to me about this lake, well, number one, it's a lake of sufficient size to operate a seaplane on, if you're allowed. Because the interesting thing, must be a bear in the bush, or an otter, or a crazy white dog. Anyway. Yeah, special note is that this lake is right under the approach path to runway 27. But more importantly is obviously on the takeoff path for runway 09 coming out of the Westview Airport. So someone in a seaplane, especially if they're having difficulty on their takeoff, since the airport is only like 2 kilometers down there, this would be an ideal place to put down in an emergency, even if you're not allowed to do normal operations on the lake. So there's the 3 Dynon modules now mounted in place on the extended tray. Looks pretty good. If I do say so myself. So this area of the project has been a big stumbling block of mine for a long time, basically since November. Coupled with the wind and rain in this exposed location has made it very difficult to do electrical work. But the real problem I found is when I energized the electrical system for the first time using the battery to put power on the simple lighting circuits, I found I had shorts or grounds, crossed wires, whatever. And with some quick troubleshooting, I realized that these D-sub connectors on the wiring harness, here's all the wires coming in and out from the lights, the power sources, the switch. They run through these D-sub connectors, they're called. And these are soldered joints. So I had to cut the wiring harness, and where I put the cut, I had to put a D-sub connector so that I can mount the D-sub connector on the wiring harness tray, and then the another piece with a D-sub connector goes up to the control panel. The wiring harness came with soldered pins. So I soldered all these connections. I did a terrible job of it. Did the best I could. Didn't realize how important it was, number one, to make sure that the solder connections were clean, and number two, I should have put shrink tube, like a plastic rubber non-conducting tube over the wire, over the soldered joint, to make sure that there was no cross connections between the solder joints. So I failed in that regard. It took me some time to come to the conclusion I had to replace all these. There's another way of doing this using crimp pins. The crimp pins use a very expensive tool. This is the one I bought off Aircraft Spruce. I won't tell you how much I paid for it, but I think I can almost trade it in and get a whole new engine. Yeah, tongue-in-cheek, but very expensive. And instead of using a soldered joint, you use a little pin, a crimp pin. This is the male, there's a female goes on the other side. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm cutting off all these soldered pins. I'm going to replace the connection with a crimp pin on each one of these wires. I'll replace this connector piece on this side and then do the same on the other side, and then I'll do the same for the other D-sub connectors that I've soldered previously. So very unfortunate. It's going to take a lot of time, but that's part of the trials and tribulations of building your own plane. You're doing things you've never maybe done before, not to this degree of accuracy or in the aviation setting, and despite all best intentions to learn everything beforehand before embarking on a new task, things sometimes just don't work out and you have to redo. Okay, so right now I'm cutting loose all these wires. I'm making sure I label them properly per the wiring diagram. Here's the wiring diagram or sheet for this D-sub connector that I used before. All the color coding and dots indicate the different steps of checking this out. So basically this is garbage. I'll start with a clean sheet and do this one all over again. Wish me luck. Though skill and knowledge is really what I need, and experience. Okay, here we go. This is the process for switching over from the soldered D-sub connectors to the crimp pin D-sub connector, which I'm doing to avoid all the problems I had with these soldered connections so far. So here we go. First thing to do is clip off wire number 19, 18, 17. It's wire number 16. Okay, so crimp it off. Sorry, cut it off. Clean up the end. Strip the end just the right amount through trial and error. Get a male crimp pin. And sure, now I have an appreciative audience. I'm talking to my camera, but that's okay. I'm just showing how this works. So I use my very expensive Mighty Blue crimper, which does an excellent job. And then I find where I put it in. It was 19, 18, 17, 16. Don't get it messed up on the wrong hole. Clipped it in. Supposed to be using a tool, which I haven't mastered, so I just use my fingers and push it in. And there you go. So I'm going to switch all these over to here. Wish me luck. This you might not recognize as anything to do with bagpipes. These obviously are. But this is a full set of bagpipes. What you learn on and what you practice on is what's called the chanter, which is the blowpipe, and the chanter, which has a reed in it. And this is the practice instrument. So, as I mentioned in my first video, I'm going to relearn a lost life skill. I learned to play the bagpipes when I was about 12, 13 years old. Sort of. Played in a band for many years. Sort of played. Mostly I marched. Filled in the back rows of the band. Had a good time. Traveled locally. Got over to Japan in 1970 for the World Exposition. So, but I put the pipe away some 40 years ago. So this is my first attempt playing the practice chanter in all that time. I promise I have not picked this thing up since then, other than to move it around. Haven't really blown it. So here's the first song I ever learned, called the Skyboat Song. Let's see if I can remember any of it. Sammy, for you, the Skyboat Song. Well, that's the first measure. By memory, I still got the old terrible style, eh? Lack of talent, lack of practice, no musicianship. But anyway, I'm going to at least get back to that low bar by the end of this project, along with some other life skills that I neglected along the way. Did I mention that I used to ride the unicycle? Next episode. Okay, so the bow deck is now in place, and I've hooked up the connections behind the control panel to the D-sub connector mounted on the wiring harness tray, the one that I've put the new crimp pins in. And let's power the system up and see if the switches work. So, turn the right side of the master switch on.
Generator.
Try the landing lights.
Generator.
Well, that's good. There's a green light on the switch. Let's see if the landing light is on.
Generator.
And it is. Hallelujah. Carb heat. Oh. There is no carb heat. There is. We're standing on the Gibraltar Bluffs lookout, looking out over the Salish Sea north of Powell River. There's Texada Island in the distance, Harwood Island in the foreground, Vancouver Island in the far distance to the west. That's Savory Island, surrounded by white sand beaches. This is Savory Island, famous for its sandy beaches. Kind of a unique ecosystem in the Salish Sea area. Many vacation homes here. People come up from Vancouver for the summers. Workaholic fathers fly up on float planes for the weekends, join the family. This is South Beach on Savory Island. Right now I'm in the heart of Savory Island, standing on an abandoned airstrip. I guess many decades ago the islanders thought it'd be a good idea to have an airstrip, but apparently there were some unfortunate incidents here and other reasons. The strip was abandoned, now taken over by the lovely looking but invasive broom, the yellow flowering shrub there that grows all over the coastal areas of the Salish Sea, including Powell River and Savory Island. Good afternoon, viewers. As we discussed in the first episode, I need to hire, obtain, steal, rent a test pilot, at least for the first few hours of the Spirit of Mackenzie's flight. And as I mentioned in the last episode, I'm looking for your assistance. You write in the comments or send me an email your ideas of who would make a good test pilot for the Spirit of Mackenzie. In the absence of any suggestions from you, my dear viewers, so far, I've come up with my first candidate. He's a retired Air Force fighter pilot and test pilot. He's got a master's degree in aviation systems from the University of Tennessee Space Institute. He was the United States Air Force test pilot, top graduate of 1988. He was the United States Navy Test Pilot of the Year in 1991. He twice flew space shuttle missions, and he became the commander of the International Space Station. And while up there on the space station, obviously not having enough other things to do with his time, he picked up a guitar somewhere, and he belted out his rendition of Space Oddity, which has had more than 50 million views on YouTube. I'm speaking of the one and only Canada's own Chris Hadfield. Now, Chris is still going strong. Just this past year, a species of bee was named after him, Andrea Hadfieldi. What an accomplishment on top of everything else he's done. A very exciting life. But Chris, I encourage you to contact me and take me up on my offer for what could be the culminating adventure and challenge of your lifetime, being the Spirit of Mackenzie test pilot. Viewers, in case he, for whatever reason, turns down this prestigious honor, please write in your recommendations, comments below, or email me. Until next week, when we discuss the next potential candidate, only if Chris turns us down. That'll be the next episode. We'll do this all over again in Test Pilot Corner.
They go down, down, down. They enchant all the ladies and see all the scenes with their up, and their down, down, down. Up, down, flying around, looping the loop and defying the ground. Up, down, they're frightfully keen, those magnificent men in their flying machines. Up, down, flying around, looping